What's up everyone? Today I'm going to talk about Pauper Affinity. I'll go through the whole deck list, give some tips on how to play it, and finally I'll mention some ideas for your own brews. Let's get into it. Alright, so pretty much the point of this deck is to make everything super cheap with artifacts, and usually free. You're going to be doing this with creatures like Myr Enforcer and Frogmite. So both of these guys have affinity for artifacts, and that reads, this spell costs 1 less to play for each artifact you control. So for Frogmite, if you control 4 other artifacts, you can just play them for free. With 39 artifacts, playing these 2 creatures for free is going to happen most of the time. Very rarely are you ever going to play either of these guys for more than 1 mana. So along with those guys, the other basis of this deck is going to be our lands. Since this is an artifact deck, we're going to be running artifact lands. Surprise! So we got 4 Tree of Tales, we're going to have 4 Seed of the Synods, 4 Great Furnaces, 4 Darksteel Citadels, and 1 Ancient Den. So along with Affinity, Metalcraft is also pretty decent in this deck, so we're going to be running 4 Carapace Forgers, which pretty typically just another 2 mana 4/4. And a 4/4 is a pretty sweet number in Pauper. A lot of creatures, the bigger guys, are going to have 3 toughness and 3 power. This puts 4/4s in a kind of an awkward spot when people are playing against you. They're going to find that most of the time, they're just going to have to lose a creature to block your guy, and that's a really good spot to be in. So this also isn't just a mid-range artifact deck. It can also be a combo artifact deck. We're going to be running Atog. Now this guy is special. This guy's activated ability is Sacrifice an Artifact. Atog gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Atog goes really well with this other card called Fling, 1 in a red, an instant. And it says, as an additional cost to cast Fling, sacrifice a creature. Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. So, as long as you have 10 artifacts, you sack all of them to Atog. Atog is 21 power, you cast Fling, bada bing bada boom, that's a dead player. Fling is pretty fun because you can also hang on to it after the combat step, so theoretically, if you were able to get an Atog in for 10 damage, you could just cast Fling after that for 10. Take him out. You gotta watch out though, Fling does say as an additional cost to cast, you have to sacrifice the creature. So if it gets counterspelled... So alongside with the artifact lands for fuel, fixing, and card draw, we'll also use a playset of Prophetic Prism. We'll do a playset of Chromatic Sphere and 3 Springleaf Drums. Prophetic Prism and Chromatic Sphere are great. They filter through both your deck and your mana. Springleaf Drum helps feed affinity and can generate mana in of itself. We're also going to be running 3 Flare Husks. Now, Flare Husk is a 1 mana artifact, and it's a living weapon, so it's just an equipment, but when you cast it, it creates a 0/0 germ, and then the equipment is attached to the germ, so it's technically a 1/1 that costs 1. But since it's technically an equipment, if the germ dies, the artifact sticks around, so you can jump block something and still have your artifact, so that's useful. Flare Husk is nice because you can play it on turn 1 and it helps you feed pretty quickly into Affinity on turn 2 or 3. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. Maybe I don't understand the deck well enough, but if I could afford a couple more copies of Chromatic Star, or maybe there's another 1 mana artifact out there I haven't thought about that'd be great in the deck, I'd maybe rather put those into it. Not a huge fan of Flare Husk. However, Flare Husk can be attached to one of your 4/4s to help get rid of a Gurmag Angler. Speaking of Gurmag Anglers, we're going to run 1 copy of Gearseeker Serpent. For 5 and blue, Gearseeker Serpent costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control, which means most of the time this is just going to cost a blue. Gearseeker also has, for 5 and a blue, Gearseeker Serpent can't be blocked this turn, which can be handy, but I find at that point of the game, when you have 6 mana, which is hard to get to in my opinion, it's either not too impactful for me, or I have to decide between using all my mana to make them unblockable, or holding up a Fling or a counterspell, or possibly a burn spell. So I'm not huge on this guy. However, he does eat Gurmag Anglers with a 5/6 body, which is pretty good. For refueling, we're going to run Thoughtcast, which is so good in this deck. It will draw you 2 cards. Unfortunately, it's sorcerer speed, but it still draws 2 cards for 1 most of the time, which is pretty solid. If you got 2 of these in your hand, and you cast them late game, you draw all 4 of your Myr Enforcers, you just get to play 2 mana and drop 4 creatures on the board. It's pretty good. Hey, you know what's a pretty good card, but doesn't get printed in Standard anymore? Lightning Bolt. You know what's better? Galvanic Blast. Galvanic Blast is an instant for red, and it deals 2 damage to any target, but it has Metalcraft, so Galvanic Blast deals 4 damage to that permanent or player instead if you control 3 or more artifacts. So this is essentially a 4 damage Lightning Bolt. That's really good. If you've got 3 of these, you can just throw them at their face for 12 damage and finish up with a fling. This card is really good, and you're going to have tons of fun casting this card, I guarantee it. We'll go ahead and wrap up the deck list with 2 copies of Metallic Rebuke. Metallic Rebuke is 2 and a blue, an instant, and has Imprify, so this is a little different than Affinity. Your artifacts can help cast this spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 colorless. So essentially, if you have 2 artifacts in a blue, you can tap the blue and tap the 2 other artifacts, even if they don't produce mana, and you can cast this card. And it says, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Metallic Rebuke is a nice addition to the deck because it gives you a little bit more flexibility than something like Dispel for 1 mana. Alright, on to the sideboard. Now, everybody's sideboard is going to be a bit different because everybody's meta is a little bit different, and your sideboard should be tailored towards your meta to help you win games. But this should be a pretty good starting point for you. Feel free to modify it however you need. Alrighty, so when the games get grindy, 2 Feed the Clans will help close any gaps between you and your opponent. Since we're running so many 4/4s, this almost always heals you for 10. We'll run 2 Ancient Grudges and 2 Natural States for other artifact decks, or even a lone Arkham's Astrolabe or Ashnod's Altar. Natural State can also help you with troublesome enchantments. We'll run 2 Negates and 2 Dispels for spell-focused decks and disrupting combos. They also help make sure your fling gets through. 1 Blue Elemental Blast to help with troublesome red cards and permanents. Gotta look out for those Gorilla Shamans. And last but not least, 4 board wipes to ruin a day of fun for any Elf, Convoke, and Delver Fairy decks out there. Electrickery is a catch-all, while Krark Clan Shaman. Krark Clan Shaman is an efficient 1-mana option for non-flyers, and it should also be noted that Krark Clan Shaman can be triggered multiple times before you allow the damage to resolve. This means you can use him as a sort of ATOG plus Crypt Rats. While he might not do this damage to opponents, 3 activations could clear a clogged board and allow your 4/4s to clean up a game. Another couple cards which I have not included in this sideboard that you should consider for yours are Tormod's Crypt and Relic of Progenitus. If you have any graveyard decks in your meta that are frustrating to play against, I highly suggest one or even both of these artifacts. Tormod's Crypt, because it costs 0, can pretty easily help you fuel Affinity. Definitely look at those if you have a lot of graveyard decks in your meta. My favorite thing about Pauper is how brew-friendly it is. This deck is not optimal. So here are some cards to consider messing with in the deck. To keep with the Artifact Sacrifice theme, 1 or 2 copies of Perilous Research could be pretty good value and fuel for the engine. An instant for 1 and a blue, Perilous Research draws 2 cards and sacrifices a permanent. 2 nice things about this card is that it's instant speed, so you can pass and hold up a counterspell or removal, and if your opponent doesn't do much, you can use your mana to draw before your turn and stay on tempo. Also, the sacrifice is not part of the cost, so if it is countered, you don't sacrifice. This card gets really good though when you include Ichor Wellspring. Ichor Wellspring is a 2-mana artifact that draws a card when it enters the battlefield and goes to the graveyard. Because we're running Affinity, this card is essentially a cantripping mana rock, and if you sack it to ATOG or Perilous Research, you draw an extra card. Seems good. Temur Battle Rage is a 2-mana instant that gives target creature Double Strike and Trample if its power is greater than 4. This card makes ATOG twice as big and gives them Trample. Honestly, I don't know why this card isn't in my base deck. It should really go in the deck. It's pretty good. So another card to consider is Chromatic Star. It's better than Chromatic Sphere because if you sacrifice it to ATOG instead of using it for mana, you still draw a card, which is a really nice touch. But a playset of Chromatic Star costs $24, so not really worth it in my opinion. But if it ever gets reprinted, or you're just rolling in the cash, be my guess. The last card is one I'm not so sold on, but I figured I'd mention it anyways. Somber Hoverguard is a 3/2 flyer with affinity for artifacts. It's basically your own Delver of Secrets once you get 5 artifacts. That just about wraps it up. If you have some great thoughts on how you'd build Affinity, leave a comment. I'd love to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when I upload weekly Pauper content. See ya!